Hey guys, tonight we're leaving behind our traffic jams, noisy neighbors, and screens that never stop glowing. Instead, you're slipping into a place where time moves slower, where your world is candlelit, the scent of wood smoke clings to your cloak, and the ground beneath your boots is uneven, damp, and very, very old. You're walking through a medieval village just as dusk settles. There's a low mist curling above the thatched rooftops, and the air smells like a mixture of sheep wool, fresh bread, and something slightly herbal. You can hear the rhythmic splash of someone rinsing out a basin and the faint chatter of neighbors from an open doorway. A black and white cat slips between your legs unimpressed. You step aside, nearly tripping over a pail of water left outside a door because people here clean a lot more than you've been led to believe. You probably won't survive this era. We're talking questionable surgeries and some very dodgy stew, but it turns out you'd die reasonably clean. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where you're all tuning in from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You see, everything you think you know about medieval hygiene is probably wrong, or at least exaggerated by Hollywood and a few too many Renaissance fair jokes. Sure, there were moments of grime and smells and, let's call it, rustic plumbing. But the idea that medieval people were all walking around crusted in filth with teeth like shattered tombstones and a mortal fear of water, that's just lazy history. You trudge past a row of timber-framed homes. A woman steps outside with a steaming bucket and tosses hot water into the street, but not onto you, thank goodness. She's cleaning her floor, scrubbing it with herbs like rosemary and lavender. A pleasant scent lingers in the air. That's right, lavender. They had it. They used it. And not just because it looked pretty in stained glass. In fact, most people, rich or poor, washed themselves regularly. Not necessarily with modern frequency, but enough to feel clean by their standards. Many villagers kept small wooden tubs inside their homes for weekly bathing. It wasn't an everyday thing, unless you had access to a stream and some free time, but it wasn't unheard of. Water was warm when they could spare the firewood, and they used soap, not always fancy, not always gentle, but effective. You duck under a low lintel and step inside a narrow kitchen. The hearth is still warm from supper, and a basin rests beside a carved wooden comb. Someone's been delousing their hair carefully, dragging the teeth through in slow, deliberate strokes. You imagine the satisfying clink as each little critter meets its soapy doom. Not exactly a spa day, but close enough. And medieval people weren't shy about lice. They talked about them, wrote about them, and fought them daily. Now here's a fun fact. They had a word for different types of bathwater. Stew wasn't just for meat. It could refer to a public bathhouse. In some towns, going to the stew was part of your weekly routine. You'd bring a towel, a change of clothes, and maybe even a friend or two. Bathing was social, sometimes flirtatious, and not always what the church approved of. But more on that later. Even peasants, those supposed mud-smeared caricatures, had grooming habits. You pick up a clay pot from the hearth's edge. Inside is a mix of ashes and animal fat homemade soap. It smells a little smoky, a little sharp. Not exactly sandalwood and oats, but you rub a dab between your fingers. It foams just a bit. Clean enough. Now, for the cheeky twist, did you know people in the Middle Ages used communal bathhouses more than in the centuries that followed? That's right. During the Renaissance, and even into the 18th century, bathing fell out of fashion. People powdered their wigs, spritzed their linens with perfume, and tried not to sweat too much. They believed water could carry disease through the pores. Ironically, you were probably cleaner in the year 1350 than in 1750. But wait, let's zoom back to your current timeline. You With your deodorant and hot showers and 10-step skincare routine, you might still be losing a clean-off to a Benedictine monk with an herbal washcloth. Let that sink in while you wrap your cloak tighter against the cool air. Oh, and speaking of monks, more on them later too. Their commitment to cleanliness bordered on obsessive. Regular foot washing, strict hygiene codes, even scheduled hair trims. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, you make your way toward the village square where a public well stands like a miniature monument. Women gather here at sunrise to fetch water, yes, but also to chat, share herbs, and yes, even swap tips on washing stubborn stains. Linen was the fabric of choice, light, breathable, and easy to scrub. And that grime you always imagine smeared across everyone's face, probably just soot from the fire, not a badge of poor hygiene. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly felt clean the way we define it today. Did they distinguish between body odor and the natural scent of labor? Did they obsess over pores and shine in nail beds? Maybe not, but they definitely valued ritual, washing clean clothes, and hair free of crawling passengers. And here's a little fringe fact to keep you awake. In some noble households, guests were offered scented towels before dinner. That's right, medieval wet wipes. Who says they weren't classy? You glance up at the stars just beginning to glow overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls. People are winding down for the night, but not before rinsing their hands and faces in cool water, because dirt might be common, but going to bed sticky and sweaty. No thanks. Even they had standards. So next time someone jokes about ye old stench, you'll know better. They bathed, they scrubbed, and honestly, if they had access to modern plumbing, they'd probably be the ones judging you for skipping a hair wash day. Now, with your boots caked in mud, but your conscience clean, you wander back toward the inn. A wooden tub waits by the fire, already filled. Steam rises. Soap floats. A linen cloth hangs nearby, folded just so. You step in the water, enveloping you with a hiss and a sigh. Even centuries ago, nothing beats the feeling of washing off the day. You're still warm from that wooden tub, and the scent of lavender hasn't quite left your skin. Outside, the moonlight slicks the cobblestones silver, and the wind whispers down empty alleys like a forgotten lullaby. You step through a narrow side street following the flicker of torches toward something unexpected. There's music, lutes, laughter, and the splashing of water. You're about to enter the medieval version of a spa. Yes, you're going to a bathhouse, but not just any bathhouse. This one is known in town as a stew, a place where people come to get wet steamy, and depending on the hour, a little too friendly. The air is thick with the scent of warm wood, boiled herbs, and something slightly more mysterious. Maybe musk, maybe sin. Hard to tell. You step inside. The warmth wraps around you instantly, soft and damp. A low fog hovers near the floor, and candlelight dances across stone walls. The bathhouse is divided by wooden screens and benches with tubs of various sizes, some small and intimate, others large enough to hold entire conversations. A woman scrubs her arms beside you, her skin flushed from the heat. Two men sit nearby in their linen undershirts discussing grain prices over a bowl of hot broth. In the corner, someone snores. No judgment here. Now, here's the twist. Most people don't expect bathhouses in the Middle Ages were extremely popular. Not just tolerated, loved. And not just in cities, but in small towns and even villages when water supplies allowed. You might think this sounds oddly progressive. But back then, bathing was seen as healthy social, and for some, even holy. You settle onto a low bench as an attendant pours warm water over your shoulders. The sensation is immediate, relaxing cleansing, and just a little tingly probably from the elderflower floating in the bucket. In many bathhouses, herbs were added to the water for both scent and supposed medicinal value. Marjoram for muscle aches, sage for skin, chamomile for nerves. You can almost hear a medieval apothecary mumbling about balancing the humors, but honestly, it just smells good. And yes, before you ask, some bathhouses had reputations. After dark, the atmosphere could shift. Prostitution wasn't uncommon, and moralists, especially the clergy, frequently wagged their fingers about it. There were even crackdowns, bans, and scandals, but you're here in the early evening before things get steamy in more ways than one. Right now, it's clean hands, warm water, and low voices. Interestingly, historians still argue whether bathhouses were primarily about hygiene or pleasure. The lines were often blurred. It wasn't uncommon for couples to visit together. Some bathhouses even served food and drink. You could sip your wine, and enjoy roast chicken without ever getting out of the tub. Talk about dinner and a soak. In fact, bathhouses were such a cultural norm that many cities had entire districts dedicated to them. London, Paris, Prague. All with stew houses, some run by guilds, and yes, rules were posted. Separate hours for men and women. No brawling in the baths. No shouting, stealing, or frolicking beyond the agreed-upon terms. Enforcement was, let's say, inconsistent. A fringe tidbit for your trivia drawer in some regions. Bathhouse workers wore specific uniforms, striped aprons or colored headscarves to denote their role, especially in more high-end establishments. Some even had house specialties like rosemary rinses or hot stone treatments. Not bad for the 14th century. You lean back against the tub's smooth edge, feeling the steam rise to your cheeks. A young boy walks past, sprinkling crushed mint leaves into a nearby pool. He hums as he works. This is his apprenticeship learning to tend fires, fill basins, and refresh the water. It's an actual trade with respect and skill. And believe it or not, bathhouses had a surprisingly long run before falling out of favor. Their decline wasn't because people suddenly decided to get dirtier. It was largely because of disease. When the plague rolled through Europe, many blamed bathhouses for spreading illness. Water opened the pores they feared allowing corruption to seep into the body. So out went the stews, and in came the perfume bottles. Still in your moment, sitting here in warm, herbal-scented water, it's easy to see why people fought to keep bathhouses alive. The sensation is more than physical. It's comforting, almost meditative. And despite the clatter of wooden buckets and the occasional giggle from the other side of the partition, the atmosphere is deeply peaceful. A communal exhale. You notice a small shelf nearby stacked with towels. Linen, not terry cloth, of course, but soft and worn from years of use. Next to them sits a jar of sweet-smelling oil. Rose and clove, maybe. People would rub it into their skin after bathing, both for fragrance and for moisture, especially during the dry winter months. And here's another little-known fact. Some bathhouses had musicians, harpists or flute players tucked into corners, adding a soft soundtrack to the experience. Imagine soaking in your tub while someone plays medieval lo-fi on a lute. Not bad at all. Now, there's one last detail you shouldn't miss. As you dry off and dress, yes, you brought a clean shift, an attendant offers you a cup of herbal tea. That's right, post-bath tea. And it's not unheard of. Infusions made with fennel lemon balm or anise were common thought to settle the stomach and soothe the nerves. You sip, and the warmth continues from the inside out. So here's the bigger picture. Medieval bathhouses weren't just about getting clean. They were spaces of community, healing, pleasure, even romance. People went not just to scrub, but to connect, to sit shoulder to shoulder, and feel, if only for a while, like they belonged to something soothing and good. You walk out into the night, your skin warm, your hair damp, and your senses alive with clove mint and flickering torchlight. And maybe, just maybe, you're starting to realize this world you thought was all dirt and disease. It had moments of deep, deliberate care, of soft rituals and shared silences. of people trying in their own scrubbed and scented way to feel human. You wake to the scent of smoke and something slightly sweet, maybe a touch of beeswax, maybe boiled barley. Sunlight filters through the oiled parchment of the inn's small window, casting a buttery glow across the wooden floor. The world is quiet, except for a rooster who's a little too enthusiastic about his job. You stretch, yawn, and realize it's time for your morning routine, medieval style. Now, you might think hygiene back then was all chaos and catastrophe, but as you stand reaching for the basin beside your cot, you discover something surprisingly familiar. A splash of cool water on your face, a rough cloth for drying, a small polished mirror hanging from the wall. The essentials. They may not sparkle with chrome, but the intent is clear. Even here, even now, people like to feel clean. Let's start at the top, your hair. You reach for a carved wooden comb, finely toothed and slightly worn at the handle. Everyone had one. Rich, poor, monk, merchant, it didn't matter. Combs weren't optional. They were tools of hygiene and defense in the ongoing war against lice. You run the comb slowly through your hair, imagining how many times it's been passed between hands, tugged through tangles soaked in vinegar for cleaning. Interestingly, some people wore their combs on a cord around their necks, ready for action at any time. Kind of like the medieval version of carrying a toothbrush in your bag, just in case. It's not glamorous, but it gets the job done. Now, let's talk face washing. You dip your cloth into the basin and give yourself a quick once-over. In many households, this was a daily practice. Not a full bath. Those took effort, but enough to remove sleep sweat and yesterday's dust. Some added herbs or floral waters to their rinse rose water if you were rich, maybe mint or elderflower if you had access to a garden. A small luxury, a personal ritual, and yes, fragrance mattered. Medieval people weren't exactly running around with aluminum-free deodorant, but they had options. Oils infused with lavender clove or sandalwood were dabbed on wrists or behind ears. They tucked little pouches of dried herbs called sachets or pomanders into their clothes. Even the sleeves of gowns or doublets might be scented. You, dear traveler, reach for a pouch hanging near your belt. It smells faintly of marjoram and thyme, and you press it briefly to your nose. Earthy, clean grounding. Now for your teeth. Here's where things get weirdly advanced and horrifying all at once. Medieval folks did clean their teeth, chewing minty twigs, rinsing with vinegar or wine, and yes, brushing with pastes made of crushed herbs, salt, or ground animal bones. Some used cloths to rub their gums. Others chewed on spices like cloves or fennel seeds for fresh breath. You find a small wooden stick near your basin. One end is frayed like a natural toothbrush. You give it a try. It's not minty exactly, but there's a crispness to it. Primitive, maybe. Effective. Also, yes, a quirky note. Medieval dental care sometimes relied on the theory of tooth worms. Yes, literal worms thought to live in your teeth and cause decay. This sounds bonkers now, but remember, they were doing their best with limited tools and a lot of creativity. And honestly, if someone told you a worm was responsible for that, molar pain, wouldn't you at least consider it? You rinse your mouth with wine. Don't judge. It's morning, and the water's not always trustworthy, and spit into the straw-strewn corner of the room. It's oddly satisfying. The mouthwash burns a little, but you feel in that medieval way ready for the day. You dress slowly, choosing the cleanest of your 2 linen shirts. Linen was popular for a reason. It was breathable, washable, and smooth against the skin. Most people owned at least one under layer that could be laundered often, while heavier outer garments were brushed down or beaten clean less frequently. You shrug into your tunic, then reach for your belt, which holds more than just your knife. It has tiny pouches for herbs, grooming tools, even a tiny comb if you're lucky. Here's where it gets funny. Grooming was so universal that even medieval artwork shows people picking fleas off themselves, or others sometimes with tender affection, sometimes with pure frustration. Lice and fleas were constant companions, but people didn't just give up. They fought back daily with combs, powders, changes of linen, and plenty of cursing. You step outside into the sunlight. The village is stirring. A woman nearby is combing her daughter's hair while murmuring a lullaby. A man shaves with a small mirror and a wickedly sharp blade carefully scraping away the stubble. Another walks past rubbing his armpits with a cloth dipped in vinegar and rosemary water. Creative, resourceful, and not nearly as gross as you expected. Historians still argue whether grooming in the Middle Ages was motivated more by health, vanity, or social pressure. Probably all three. Cleanliness could be spiritual, a sign of inner purity. It could also be practical. No one wants fleas during dinner. And it could be cosmetic. People liked to look nice. Nobles shaped their beards, braided their hair, and wore cosmetics subtly. Yes, even the men. A fringe fact for the day, some medieval colognes were so strong they doubled as insect repellents. A well-scented courtier might smell like a cross between a monastery garden and a pepper mill, but they'd also be bite-free. You pass a small reflective pool and catch sight of yourself. Your hair is neat. Your clothes are fresh. You smell vaguely of rosemary and whatever's burning at the baker's. It's not glamorous, but it's real. And honestly, you look pretty good. In this world, grooming isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. A daily fight against dirt, discomfort, and the things that bite. But it's also something gentler, a way to feel human, to start the day with intention. To say, I'm still here, lice or not, and as you walk toward the market square, your herbal pouch swaying gently at your side, you realize that medieval cleanliness isn't a myth. It's just been forgotten. Buried under layers of modern smugness and a few too many Monty Python jokes. So, go ahead, give yourself a medieval glow-up. Just maybe skip the vinegar rinse and the toothworms. You finished your morning routine. Your face washed, your hair combed, your herbal sachet tucked neatly in your belt like some kind of minty medieval fanny pack. As you stroll through the village, the chatter of the marketplace picks up around you. Clinking coins, the baa of a goat who very much does not want to be sold, and the occasional whiff of something both delicious and unidentifiable. But today, you're not shopping. You're visiting a castle. Specifically, you're going to the toilet. Now, before you wrinkle your nose or picture some hole in the mud behind a bush, let's clarify something. Castle latrines, also called garderobes, were surprisingly sophisticated. You make your way across the drawbridge past guards and their yawning dogs, through the stone corridors echoing with footsteps. A serving boy leads you to the upper level, where sunlight pours through narrow windows, and the air smells faintly of stone and smoke. The garderobe is tucked into a small stone chamber built along the outer wall. It juts out over the moat like a precarious balcony, and when you peek inside, it's exactly what you didn't expect: a long stone bench with a keyhole-shaped opening smooth from centuries of use. You take a cautious seat and glance down through the hole, and there it is. A very long drop into either a pit at the base of the wall or sometimes directly into a moat. Let's just say no one's bathing down there, but it works. Gravity, airflow, and a bit of architectural cleverness. Some garderobes even had chutes lined with wooden boards to direct waste away from the castle walls. Not quite a flush toilet, but functional. And yes, breezy. You shift slightly on the cool stone and realize this is both a throne and a wind tunnel. The smell, not as bad as you'd think. The height, fresh air, and regular cleaning kept things bearable. Linen rags, moss, or straw might serve as wiping tools, though in wealthier castles you might even find soft scraps of cloth set aside for that purpose. You pause. Let's just say you're grateful for modern plumbing, but you're not gagging either. Now here's a quirky detail you wouldn't expect people sometimes stored clothes in or near the garderobe. Sounds gross, right? But it was actually strategic. The ammonia from the waste helped repel lice and moths. You glance at a hanging tunic swaying gently from a nearby hook and wonder just how desperate you'd have to be for pest control. The very word garderobe comes from the French for guarding clothes a room not just for doing your business, but for keeping your belongings. Surprisingly, parasite-free. Welcome to multitasking medieval style. You step back into the corridor, where the stone walls suck in the moisture of the morning, and you can hear footsteps approaching from the great hall. Someone else is making their way to the latrine, probably with less awe than you're feeling. To them, this is just daily life. So let's talk about waste management. In cities and towns, it was a messier affair. Many homes had chamber pots, portable ceramic bowls used at night or indoors. People emptied them into cesspits trenches, or sometimes directly into the street. There were even official night soil men who would come to collect and cart off the mess. Imagine that on your resume. But people weren't just flinging things out windows like a slapstick comedy sketch. In many cities, there were laws, real ones, about waste disposal. In London, for instance, you could be fined for throwing filth into the street or not cleaning your portion of the gutter. Repeat offenders risked more serious consequences, sometimes even public shaming. Historians still argue whether sanitation in medieval towns was as bad as the worst records make it seem. Some accounts are clearly exaggerated, written by travelers who wanted to paint foreign cities as disgusting or uncivilized. Others are based on real public health concerns, especially as towns grew and populations swelled. But here's a curious fact: many medieval streets were sloped intentionally to allow rain to wash away debris and waste. Not perfect, but clever. And there were public latrines in large towns, often near churches, markets, or bridges. Simple stone structures with long benches and holes. Shared, of course. You might be shoulder to shoulder with a stranger while doing your business. Just make sure not to make too much eye contact. As you leave the castle and head back through the village, you pass a row of houses with outhouses tucked into corners of small gardens. Wooden stalls, privacy screens, even composting heaps. Waste wasn't just dumped, it was often used. Farmers knew the value of manure, and waste, when properly aged, became fertilizer. Everything had a purpose, even the unpleasant parts. You stop by a small inn to grab a bite and hear a local gossiping about a neighbor who's too proud to clean his own pit. Seems even in the Middle Ages, no one liked a person who refused to do their share. Hygiene wasn't just about your own body, it was a social contract. If your waste caused problems, you'd hear about it. The innkeeper chuckles and tells you about the time a nobleman built a latrine so elaborate it had cushions. Cushions. He laughs harder. Probably a bit of an exaggeration, but not impossible. Wealthy lords often tried to outdo each other with comfort and innovation. Some castles even had rudimentary water channels to rinse the latrine. One had a system where rainwater collected and flushed out the waste. That's right, medieval flush toilets in a way. You take your bread and cheese, sit by the window, and watch as a servant rinses out a chamber pot in the alley. Not glamorous, not fun, but necessary. The rinse water is poured down a designated channel in the street away from where people walk. And like so much in this world, it's a small act of routine, of daily hygiene that often gets lost in the stories. The truth is, medieval people cared. They might not have had your plumbing, your scented toilet paper, or your obsession with disinfectant, but they still valued cleanliness, dignity, and yes, the relief of a well-placed toilet seat. As you stand to leave, a gust of wind rustles your tunic, and you smile, remembering the fresh breeze in that lofty stone guardrobe. Say what you will, those medieval folks knew how to design a bathroom with a view. You're standing by the moat sleeves rolled up, the early afternoon sun warming your neck. A gentle breeze carries the scent of water lilies, wet stone, and soap made from things you'd rather not think too hard about. Today is laundry day, and you, brave soul that you are, have been handed a basket full of tunics that seem to have survived a small war. You glance around. You're not alone. All along the bank, women kneel with their sleeves hiked up and skirts tucked at the waist. There's splashing, murmuring, and the soft thump of cloth being rhythmically smacked against flat stones. It's strangely calming, this slow medieval dance of rinse, wring, and repeat. Laundry in the Middle Ages wasn't just a chore. It was a communal event, part necessity, part social gathering, and sometimes even gossip central. People didn't have washing machines or hot running water, but they had plenty of know-how. The soap was harsh, the water was cold, and elbow grease was the name of the game. You pull out your first item, a linen shirt stained at the collar and underarms. Lovely. You dip it into the moat, give it a good swirl, and then reach for the soap, a grayish lump that smells faintly of ashes and animal fat. Welcome to the world of lye-based soap, strong enough to clean a tunic and possibly remove your fingerprints. Here's the fringe bit to get those whites really bright. People sometimes used urine. Not just any old pee, mind you, but stale urine, left to sit until it fermented into a strong ammonia-rich cleanser. You glance sideways at a large wooden bucket set off to the side and pretend very hard that it's not full of pee. But it probably is. And guess what? It worked. Ammonia cuts through grease like a charm, and it was a readily available resource. Medieval people didn't waste much, not even that. You scrub with a brush made of bundled twigs. It's not gentle, but neither is the stain. The women nearby are talking about a neighbor's upcoming wedding, the sudden disappearance of 3 chickens, and whether dried thyme really keeps moths away. Someone laughs. Someone sings a lullaby. You realize between splashes and suds that this is one of the rare moments of peace in the day. And yes, medieval people washed their clothes regularly. Not daily, most folks had only 1 or 2 sets of clothing, but often enough that the buildup of sweat oil and smoke didn't become overwhelming. Linen undergarments were washed more frequently, while woolen outerwear was beaten brushed, or even snow-cleaned, laid out in fresh snow, and then beaten to lift out the dirt. Historians still debate just how often different classes laundered their garments. Wealthier folks had more changes of clothing and servants to do the dirty work. Poorer folks had to do it themselves, and time it carefully washing on sunny days when clothes could dry quickly. But there are records, plenty of them, of laundry being a regular part of life. A servant girl beside you reaches into her basket and pulls out a mystery garment with a giant stain on the front. She sighs and mutters something about goat cheese, then dips it into a tub filled with hot water brought in from a nearby kitchen fire. Not everyone had a moat, obviously. In towns and cities, laundry was done at communal washhouses or using water drawn from wells. Some even had designated washwomen, whose full-time job was to keep the community's clothes clean. Now, here's a little twist you didn't see coming. Medieval laundresses were sometimes feared for their knowledge of herbs and stains. Some even dabbled in light cosmetics or tonics, passing recipes around while slapping garments on stones. They knew which plants could bleach linen, soften wool, or dye fabric. Woad madder and saffron were common. If you wanted a tunic that screamed noble in deep blue or rich red, these were your go-to pros. You look down at your wet tunic, now freshly scrubbed and ready for rinsing. You haul it up, water pouring down your arms, and give it a sharp snap before laying it out in the sun on the grass. There's something incredibly satisfying about the way it flattens, clean, damp, and slightly fragrant in that rustic, smoky way. And here's something else to consider. Washing clothes was also an act of pride. Walking into church on Sunday in a clean shirt, no visible stains and sweet-smelling herbs tucked into your sleeves, that was a big deal. Clean clothes weren't just for comfort, they were for appearances. A form of social currency. People noticed. You squint toward the castle in the distance, and imagine the laundresses of nobility hauling linens to great boiling pots, stirring them with long sticks, lifting steaming sheets into the air like ghostly sails. In noble households, laundry days were massive operations. Entire teams of servants worked together, scrubbing, drying, ironing with heated stones, and folding everything with almost military precision. And because this is the Middle Ages, of course, there's a weird superstition too. Some believed that leaving laundry out overnight could attract evil spirits, or worse, spoil the clothes. Others swore by drying linens inside near the hearth to keep the bad air out. You make a mental note not to tempt any ghosts with your socks. You roll up your sleeves again, reaching for the last item, a long under-tunic brown with soot at the hem. It's heavy, but the rhythm of the work is oddly hypnotic. Scrub, rinse, wring, spread. Over and over. Until the sun shifts, and your pile of clean clothes grows like a tiny fabric mountain beside you. As you work, a small boy comes by with a basket of dried lavender. He hands each woman a small handful. You crush the purple buds between your fingers and sprinkle them over your drying linen. The scent lifts on the breeze, floral, clean, calming. This is medieval laundry, half labor, half ritual. Hard on the hands, but good for the soul. There's no spin cycle, no softener, no dryer sheets with vaguely tropical names. Just water, herbs, patience, and community. You stand up, stretching your back, and admire your work. Clothes clean, sun warm, and not a single goat has wandered off with your drying shift. Success. So the next time someone tells you medieval people were filthy, tell them about the women kneeling by the moat, about the crushed lavender, the warm rinse water, and the quiet pride in a well-scrubbed tunic. Because even in a world of dirt roads and chamber pots, people still cared about smelling fresh, looking sharp, and most importantly, not wearing goat cheese to church. Your tunic, now sun-dried and crisply folded, smells faintly of lavender riverbank breeze, and maybe just a whisper of yesterday's struggle. You run your hand along the coarse fibers and marvel at how something so simple, clean clothes, feels like armor in this world. But there's still something more pressing. Literally, your skin itches. After a morning spent scrubbing, it's time to talk about the soap. Not the gentle eucalyptus-scented bar you might have tucked in your modern shower caddy. No, we're diving hands first into medieval soap, gritty gray, and potent enough to terrify the concept of dirt right off your body. You walk past the market stalls where the soap makers, usually women, have set up their wares. You stop at one wooden table that's stacked with unassuming chunks of beige and gray. The vendor grins and waves a crooked hand toward her wares. Best lie soap this side of the marsh, she boasts. You pick up a piece. It's dense, heavy, and smells sharp. Not floral, not fruity. Just clean in the most aggressive sense. This, dear traveler, is what most medieval folks used to wash their hands, bodies, and clothes, a soap made from rendered animal fat. And lye, an alkaline substance often derived from wood ash. Sounds simple, and it was, but also dangerous in the wrong proportions. Too little lye, and your soap wouldn't clean a thing. Too much, and it could burn your skin. You think of it as a cleanser, but it's really a controlled chemical reaction. Very punk rock. You duck behind a stable where a small tub waits beside a pile of firewood. It's your turn to bathe. Again, you lower yourself into the lukewarm water. Someone else clearly got to the firewood before you did, and reach for a bar of that infamous soap. It doesn't foam like you're used to. There's no mountain of bubbles, no wafting bouquet of grapefruit, bergamot, vanilla, whatever. Instead, the soap drags across your skin like a slightly sandy stone, and you scrub. Hard. Your arms, your legs, your neck, everywhere the sun and the flies have touched. The texture is abrasive, but in a weirdly satisfying way. You imagine pores surrendering decades of dirt, even if they've only collected 2 days' worth. The lye lifts away grease and sweat like a spell. It stings a little, probably means it's working. Here's something to chew on soap, varied wildly depending on your social status and geography. In the Mediterranean, olive oil was used to make a milder, greener soap known as Castile soap. It was softer, gentler, and a bit fancier. Definitely more appealing if you had noble skin to maintain. Up north, where animal fat was easier to come by than olive groves, the soaps were tougher, thicker, and often used more harshly. Now, you might be wondering, did people really use this kind of soap on their faces? The answer is a hesitant sometimes. Many people used gentler alternatives for facial cleansing, plain water, herb-infused rinses, or cloths soaked in warm milk or wine. The lye soap, that was more for elbows, feet, and any part of you that came into prolonged contact with mud livestock or public transportation by horse. And remember, not all soap was homemade. In larger towns and cities, soap-making was a profession. Some regions had entire guilds devoted to producing and regulating soap quality. You picture rows of copper cauldrons bubbling over brick hearths, the air thick with smoke and the faint aroma of boiled fat and caustic fumes. Probably not a dream career, but an essential one. Historians still argue over how frequently people used soap versus just rinsing with water. Some suggest it was saved for special occasions, baths before festivals, weddings, or long pilgrimages. Others believe it played a more daily role, at least for the hands and feet especially, among tradesfolk and cooks. One fringe account even mentions a noblewoman who refused to marry a man because he smelled of soap only on the Sabbath. So, yes, expectations existed. As you scrub your calloused feet, you glance at a small jar beside the tub. It's filled with something that looks suspiciously like gray sludge, a local concoction, part soap, part ash, paste, part herbal oil. You sniff it, strong but not unpleasant, rosemary and something earthy. You apply it to your scalp, rubbing it into your hair until it starts to tingle. Medieval shampoo, sort of. People did clean their hair, though, often less frequently than their bodies. Oil and powder treatments were common, especially for removing lice or freshening between washes. And when they did go full wash mode, it was often with the same lye soap, or for the rich, more aromatic and milder blends. You rinse off with a wooden pitcher, pouring warm water from shoulder to toes. You feel oddly invigorated. Not spa-refreshed, maybe, but definitely like a layer of the world has been peeled off. And here's a niche tidbit. Some medieval people believed soap could cure minor skin ailments. Rashes, boils, even headaches, though we'll chalk that one up to wishful thinking. Herbalists often blended medicinal plants into soap, comfrey yarrow, even crushed poppy seed. Some of these formulas weren't far off from what you'd find in a modern health store. Others, well, probably best left in the past. You step out of the tub, dripping but clean. A coarse linen towel waits nearby. It's not plush, but it does the job. As you dry off, the wind catches your hair and you realize you smell like you've done battle with a pine tree and won. Earthy, sharp, clean. A stable boy walks by and wrinkles his nose. "Soap, eh?" he says with a grin. "You'll scare the horses smelling like that." You laugh. It's probably true. In a world where most people are just trying to manage their scent somewhere between barn and acceptable, a full scrub down can raise eyebrows. You dress in fresh linen, feeling somehow lighter. Your skin glows slightly, and not just from effort. Even with all its harshness, the soap has done its job. It's stripped away the layers, revealing the you that was hiding underneath mud and sweat. And as you walk back into town, past the vendors, the pigs, the clanging of iron at the smithy, you realize something important. Medieval hygiene wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about pampering. It was about resilience, about facing a dirty world with your best soap-scrubbed self. So the next time someone tells you medieval people didn't bathe, or that they feared water, tell them about the sting of lye soap, the ash-slick shampoo, and the quiet pride in being just a little too clean for your century. You're walking down a cobbled path toward the apothecary's shop. your skin tingling faintly from that recent lye encounter. Clean, absolutely. Moisturized, not even a little, but that's a problem for another century. Right now, you've got something else on your mind, your teeth. Yes, your not-so-pearly pre-toothpaste, pre-dentist medieval teeth. Inside the apothecary's dim little shop, the air is thick with the mingled aromas of dried sage vinegar, beeswax, and a mystery blend that might be clove or might be whatever's hiding in that jar with a faded scratched on the side. Shelves are crammed with tiny pots, bundles of herbs, powders wrapped in linen and long-handled spoons that look more surgical than culinary. You run your tongue over your teeth, trying to decide where to start. There's a hint of grain from breakfast bread and maybe mutton. You grab a soft cloth and a small pot labeled dentrificium, which promises to banish foul humors from the mouth. Sounds promising. The texture is gritty, crushed charcoal, maybe a pinch of salt, and something that smells like dried mint. You wrap the cloth around your finger and begin to scrub. No bristles, no plastic handle, no fluoride. But it works, kind of. The salty grit scours away the morning fuzz, and the mint leaves your breath fresher than expected. For a moment, you feel oddly modern. Then you accidentally inhale some powder and nearly sneeze your soul out. The truth is, dental care in the Middle Ages wasn't a complete disaster. People cleaned their teeth. They may not have known about bacteria or plaque, but they certainly knew about bad breath, sore gums, and toothaches that made you want to crawl under the nearest church pew and stay there. People chewed parsley or cloves to freshen their breath. Some swished with vinegar or diluted wine. Others rubbed their gums with crushed sage leaves or dabbed on honey mixed with pepper. There were recipes, lots of them, for pastes and powders that promised everything from whitened teeth to pain relief to magical worm expulsion. Ah, yes, the worms. Let's talk about one of the more colorful medieval dental theories, toothworms. According to some texts, cavities weren't caused by bacteria or sugar, but by little creatures burrowing into your molars. These worms were said to gnaw at the tooth from the inside, causing the pulsing pain we now know as inflammation. You pause mid-scrub and picture a tiny, squiggly worm with a medieval helmet chewing its way through enamel. Disturbing, yes, but oddly creative. Treatments for toothworms ranged from herbal poultices to full-on smoke fumigations, where you'd hold a burning mixture under the affected tooth and try to smoke out the offending creature. You can almost imagine the apothecary asking, "Do you feel the worm exiting yet?" "No, sir. Just my will to live." Historians still argue whether these toothworm theories were universally accepted or more regional folklore. Some medical texts mention them as fact. Others omit them entirely, focusing instead on gum treatments and tooth extractions. Either way, people took tooth pain seriously. You'd have to. Without antibiotics, even a bad cavity could become a dangerous infection. You glance around the apothecary's shop and spot a jar labeled Dragon's Blood Resin. It's deep red and slightly sticky, supposedly good for gum inflammation. You smear a little on your fingertip and press it to your gums. Tingly, a little spicy, oddly pleasant. You try not to think about where exactly dragon's blood comes from. Hint, it's a plant resin, not mythical roadkill. Now, brushing was only part of the routine. Dental hygiene was also about prevention. People avoided certain foods they believed caused decay, often sticky or overly sweet things. Not that they had endless sugar. In fact, unless you were wealthy, sugar was rare and expensive. Most sweetness came from honey fruits or wine. And those who did eat sugar nobles, royalty, merchants, well, let's just say their teeth didn't age gracefully. Fun fact, when archaeologists examine medieval skeletons, they often find that peasants had better teeth than the rich. Why? Less sugar, more fiber, simpler diets. Sure, they didn't have access to high-end dental care. And by high-end, we mean less blood, but they also didn't rot their molars with imported candy from Venice. You grab a twig from a basket near the door frayed at one end, stripped of bark. It's a chew stick, used much like a toothbrush. People would chew the end until it became soft and brush-like, then rub it across their teeth and gums. Certain woods like miswak or hazel even had antibacterial properties. You gnaw experimentally. It's bitter, but your mouth feels cleaner already. Some medieval folks even used small toothpicks made of bone silver or wood to clean between teeth. Hygiene tools weren't just for the wealthy either. Simple picks and cloths were common across all social classes. A sharp sliver of bone in the wrong hands. Though let's not think too hard about medieval DIY dental surgery. You pass by a small wooden cabinet that clearly houses the serious stuff. Inside, instruments for pulling teeth. Hooks, pliers, levers. All with a terrifying gleam, and the kind of design that says I'm here to ruin your week. If brushing and herbs didn't help extraction, was often the only solution. No anesthesia, of course. Maybe some strong wine. Maybe a prayer. Maybe your cousin holding you down. You step back from the cabinet and reevaluate your entire relationship with modern dentistry. But it's not all horror and worm smoke. Some monasteries kept detailed medical records, including dental treatments. Monks, ever the clean freaks of medieval life, promoted oral hygiene as part of bodily purity. There are records of daily mouth rinses, recommended herbal pastes, and even the careful shaping of ivory teeth for denture-like inserts. Yes, medieval dentures. Often made from bone wood or animal teeth. Functional barely, but the effort was there. You swish a bit of wine in your mouth, not for dental reasons, just because this is all a lot, and walk out into the sunshine. Your teeth feel gritty, but oddly clean. Your breath smells like mint and resin. You pass a group of children chewing sticks, laughing, one of them sticking a flower petal to his missing front tooth. Dental hygiene might be rough, but it's not humorless. You realize something as you walk on. Even without toothpaste floss or electric brushes, medieval people cared about their teeth. They may not have had all the answers, but they made the effort. They cleaned, they chewed, they rinsed. They looked into their polished brass mirrors and said, "Good enough," before heading out to face the day. So next time someone claims that all medieval people had black rotting stumps for teeth, you can say with full confidence, sure, some did. But others were chewing cloves, rubbing sage on their gums, and brushing with wine. And you've got the freshest breath on the street. You're strolling through the cloister now, bare feet padding softly over smooth stone warmed by the midday sun. Around you, monks move like shadows, robes, rustling murmurs, echoing beneath vaulted arches. You pass a small fountain set into the center of a quiet courtyard where water trickles over carved limestone, a lullaby in liquid form. A sparrow flits past, wings beating like whispers. You feel calm, still, clean even. Because here in the monastery, cleanliness isn't just a preference. It's a practice. Monks didn't mess around with hygiene. You might think of them as isolated scribes hunched over dusty manuscripts, but in reality, their lives were full of ritual, bathing, hand-washing stations, and some seriously detailed grooming schedules. You're in one of the most orderly environments in the medieval world. Everything has its place, its rhythm, its reason, including soap. A bell tolls, and the brother beside you nods. It's time for midday prayers. But before entering the chapel, everyone stops at a long stone trough where clean water flows constantly through a spout. You watch as they wash their hands, not a quick splash, but a deliberate, almost meditative act. Rubbing each finger, rinsing the wrists, drying with a shared cloth that's replaced each day like clockwork. This isn't a one-time deal. Monastic rules, especially those of the Benedictines, required cleanliness before meals, prayers, writing, and pretty much anything that involved community interaction. You're handed a small linen towel and follow suit, dipping your hands in the cool water and letting the moment ground you. And yes, it's all about more than just looking nice. Cleanliness in a monastic context was tied to spiritual purity. Filth was seen not just as physically uncomfortable, but morally questionable. Washing became a form of penance and preparation, a way to align the outer body with the inner soul. Think of it as holy skincare, minus the influencer hashtags. Inside the refectory, where the monks take meals in silence, you spot a small alcove near the entrance filled with washing basins, extra cloths, and a bottle of lightly perfumed oil. That's right, perfumed oil. Even in this austere world of fasting and scripture, there's room for rosewater and camphor. It's not vanity, it's devotion. One fringe tidbit for your mental keepsake. Some monastic orders included foot washing in their weekly routines, not just their own feet, but each other's. Every Saturday evening, monks would line up, take turns, and wash one another's feet in a deeply symbolic gesture of humility and service. You imagine the scene: calloused souls, bowed heads, the gentle slosh of warm water in earthenware bowls. And let's talk about the bathhouse. Yes, even monasteries had them. In fact, some of the best-maintained bath complexes in medieval Europe were part of monastic estates. A proper Benedictine monastery had a balneary, a designated bathing house often connected to a water source or aqueduct. It wasn't an everyday soak, mind you, but monks were allowed regular baths, more than the average layperson might assume. Historians still debate how often these baths were used. Some texts say once a week, others once a month, unless you were elderly, sick, or of noble birth. But even the lowest-ranking monk could expect the occasional dip in a warm tub with soap made from herbs gathered right on the grounds. Sage, marjoram, lavender, soothing and antiseptic, a botanical spa menu written in Latin. You follow a young novice as he leads you to the scriptorium. His sandals click lightly as he glides past shelves of scrolls and books, the air inside thick with beeswax and ink. Here, cleanliness has another layer: preservation. Before copying sacred texts, monks washed their hands meticulously, not just out of reverence, but to avoid staining or damaging the precious parchment. Ink-stained fingers were common, but the smudges from dirt or oil, unacceptable. And their clothes laundered. Maybe not daily, but rotated with impressive consistency. Each monk had at least 2 robes, one to wear, one to wash. The washing was often done by lay brothers or rotating work crews, and again soap played its rough but noble role. No urine buckets here, though you breathe a quiet sigh of relief. Monasteries preferred gentler ingredients when possible, often relying on lye-light mixtures and ash pastes with a hint of wildflower. You pass a laundry room tucked between 2 stone corridors. Inside, robes hang from pegs still dripping from the morning rinse. In one corner, a monk tends a cauldron, stirring heated water with a long paddle. Steam rises in gentle clouds. There's something oddly serene about it all. This sacred choreography of washing, drying, folding. It's not just a chore. It's a vow in motion. The older monk beside you chuckles softly and points to a corner shelf stacked with combs, razors, and tiny flasks of oil. Even the tonsure needs upkeep, he says, touching the top of his head with pride. That circular bald patch, not a natural development. It's maintained with weekly shavings done with careful hands and sharp blades. A clean tonsure showed devotion, discipline, and a good barber among the brethren. You join him for a midday trim. The razor is small, but the strokes are steady. No chit-chat, just the soft scrape of blade against scalp, like a slow whisper through the hair. You sit very still, not just to avoid a nick, but because there's a strange reverence to it all. A sense that grooming here is a sacred thing, a pause, a presence. Historians still argue whether monastic cleanliness truly extended beyond the cloisters. Did monks influence lay hygiene, or did they hoard their habits within abbey walls? Some suggest monks set the bar for local standards. Others believe their strict rules remained mostly internal. What we do know is that their records written meticulously help us understand the rhythms of medieval hygiene better than any noble diary ever could. As evening settles, you sit near the chapel entrance. Hands freshly washed hair, trimmed skin lightly scented from earlier ablutions. A candle flickers beside you, casting warm shadows across the flagstone floor. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls vespers, and the monks begin their procession silent, solemn, clean. You close your eyes, not because you're tired, but because you're at peace. In a world often painted as filthy and chaotic, you've found an oasis of order, of rituals rooted in soap and stillness, of people who believed that to cleanse the body was to respect the soul. And as the wind rustles the herbs in the cloister garden, you realize something maybe modern life could use a few more sacred wash basins, and a lot more lavender oil. The next morning, the monastery is behind you, and the quiet hush of cloisters has given way to the hum and buzz of the town. You make your way through a bustling street that smells like a bazaar, but not entirely unpleasant mix of yeast smoke, damp wool, and roasted onions. The crowds are thick today, merchants hawking wares, pigs wandering as if they own the place, children chasing a dog that clearly wants none of it. And with the press of bodies comes odor. But here's the twist. It's not as horrific as you might expect. Sure, there's the occasional waft of something feral, but most people have made a visible, or rather, olfactory effort. You pass a baker with a small cloth tied around his neck. A pouch dangles from it, releasing a faint scent of rosemary. A woman pushes past her apron, dusted with flour, and you catch a quick, surprising whiff of lavender. It's subtle, but it's there. Today, you're exploring one of the most underappreciated parts of medieval hygiene, personal scent management. In a world with limited access to daily bathing, people still found ways to smell decent, sometimes even good. You duck into a small shop tucked between a cobbler's stall and a street musician mangling a lute. Inside, shelves are lined with tiny glass vials, beeswax-sealed jars, and linen pouches tied with colorful thread. You're in a medieval perfumery, or the closest thing to it. The shopkeeper, a wiry man with fingers stained from crushed herbs, grins and offers you a dab of oil on a strip of linen. Rose and thyme, he says, with just a whisper of clove. You press it to your wrist and inhale. Earthy, spicy, clean. Not overpowering, not synthetic, just natural. Medieval people used perfumes and scented oils not just to mask odors, but as part of their hygiene ritual. They believed good smells kept disease at bay, based on the theory of miasma or bad air as a source of illness. So fragrance wasn't vanity, it was self-defense. You sample another blend, this one sharper with camphor and vinegar. It tingles your nose like a citrusy slap. Good for crowds, the shopkeeper says with a wink. Keeps the pox away. You nod, unsure whether to be comforted or mildly alarmed. Outside, you notice more examples of medieval scent hacks. A merchant wears a small pomander, a hollow metal ball, hanging from a chain filled with herbs, spices, or even dried orange peels. As he walks, the ball swings gently, releasing a protective aroma cloud. Portable perfume meets plague prevention. Genius. Wealthier folks had more elaborate scent tools. Some carried scented gloves, soaked in aromatic oils like bergamot or myrtle. Others used embroidered handkerchiefs dabbed with perfume, not just to sniff, but to hold delicately over the nose when passing through, say, less fragrant alleys. You imagine someone dramatically wafting their linen like a 14th century TikTok beauty tutorial. Today's scent is crushed sage and smug disdain. Historians still argue whether medieval scent culture was primarily about hygiene or symbolism. Did people wear perfumes to signal wealth or to guard against invisible miasmas? Probably both. Scent was power, protection, identity. It told people who you were and whether they should stand closer or step back. Now, what about the armpits? Glad you asked. Deodorant, as we know it, didn't exist. But people absolutely tried. One popular method was rubbing a cloth soaked in vinegar and herbs like mint sage or thyme on the underarms. Some used scented powders made from dried flowers and ground chalk. Others went straight to the source, rubbing the fresh herbs themselves beneath their arms. You give it a try. Sage leaves crushed and tucked discreetly under your tunic. It's cooling. Sharp. Not bad. And it worked at least somewhat. Not for 48-hour protection, but for making body odor more tolerable. Besides, in a world where everyone smelled like something, the goal wasn't to be scentless. It was to be socially acceptable. Fresh sweat wasn't a crime. Neglect was. You stop at a public fountain where a few townsfolk are rinsing their hands and faces. A woman beside you carries a pouch of dried petals, rose and marigold, and rubs it on her cheeks after washing. A kind of scented blush. No one bats an eye. This is just part of the routine. And here's a delightful fringe tidbit. Some medieval folks scented their bedsheets. That's right. They'd tuck bundles of herbs into the straw mattress or rub oils on the linens to create a pleasant sleeping environment. Chamomile, lavender, and even hops were popular. You can practically smell it, earthy, calming, slightly bitter with a honeyed undertone. You suddenly wish you could take a nap right now wrapped in rosemary dreams. Fashion played a role too. Garments were often designed with cleanliness in mind. Linen underlayers were changed and washed more frequently than woolen outerwear, absorbing sweat and body oils. Some nobles lined their sleeves with sweet-smelling sachets, little bundles of crushed herbs that kept their garments fresh. The underarm area of gowns and tunics became quite literally a herbal delivery system. You walk toward the churchyard where a funeral procession is beginning. Mourners carry sprigs of rosemary not just as a symbol of remembrance, but to help mask the smell of decay. Fragrance was woven into every part of life, from birth baths to death rites. It wasn't superficial. It was sacred. As you wander past the cemetery wall, you spot a woman hanging linens on a line strung between two trees. She spritzes them with a mixture of rosewater and something sharper, maybe vinegar. The scent catches the breeze and dances toward you. Even their laundry had a signature scent. Historians still debate how often commoners could afford or access perfumed products. Imported spices and essential oils were expensive. Yes, but local herbs were free, and knowledge was often passed down through families or shared in market squares. Simpler scent rituals didn't require wealth, only intention. So no, medieval folks weren't walking perfume counters, but they weren't wandering stink clouds either. You stop to sniff your own sleeve, still faintly saggy. A success. As the sun dips lower, you pass a small group preparing herbs for market. Bundles of thyme, hyssop, and costmary are being tied with twine ready for sale. A boy runs past with a nosegay, a tiny bouquet of flowers, and herbs tucked behind his ear. Even children got in on the scent game. Sometimes for play, sometimes for protection. You sit on a bench near the square, surrounded by the soft rise and fall of life. Children's laughter horses clopping on stone, the jangle of bells from a distant cart. You're no longer surprised when you catch another breeze of something fresh, not smoke or sewage, but clean linen, crushed petals, and sun-warmed soap. In this world, hygiene isn't a luxury. It's a choice made every day with small, deliberate acts. A rinse, a sachet, a sprig of rosemary tucked into a sleeve. So the next time someone mocks the stench of the Middle Ages, you can remind them in a world without deodorant, they still manage to smell like roses. Literally. The town square is still buzzing behind you as you head toward the barber's shop, a small timber-framed building with a red and white pole spinning gently in the breeze. It creaks slightly as it turns, and your sleepy brain suddenly connects the image, blood, and bandages. That's what the iconic pole stood for. And today, you're about to find out why. Inside, the smell of iron oil and damp linen curls up your nose. It's a small space, cozy in a vaguely threatening way. Jars line the wall, some filled with herbs, others with what looks like teeth. There's a chair in the center, wooden with a high back, and a basin at its foot. A thick leather strap hangs from the armrest. You hope that's for comfort, not restraint. The barber-surgeon greets you with a grin and a gleam in his eye. He's wearing a short apron and a cap, hands already stained from the morning's work. "Here for a trim or a bleed?" he asks cheerfully, as if offering tea or coffee. You laugh nervously and mutter, "Just the beard today." But in truth, this is more than a barber shop. It's a hub of medieval grooming health care, and sometimes light surgical experimentation. You settle into the chair, and he begins by sharpening his blade on a leather strop. The sound is soothing, in an ominous kind of way, hick, hick, hick. Then he lifts a small jar of oil and rubs it into your jawline. It smells of rosemary and bear fat, and while the texture is a little greasy, it softens the hair instantly. A straight razor glides along your jaw, warm and precise. There's no talking, just the scrape and the occasional flick of a cloth. You close your eyes and surrender to the moment. Shaving, in medieval times, wasn't just about appearance. It was about status, discipline, and yes, hygiene. Hair collects dirt, oil, and lice. Keeping it neat or removing it entirely was a strategic choice. Monks kept the tonsure. Knights often went clean-shaven before battle. Even peasants shaved when they could. You could measure a man's means and mindset by his grooming habits. Of course, the barber wasn't just the neighborhood trimmer. He was also the go-to for bloodletting, tooth-pulling, wound stitching, and even minor amputations. It sounds terrifying, but in a world with limited access to physicians, barber-surgeons were essential. You glance at the tools neatly arranged beside you. Shears, razors, clamps, a bone saw, hopefully decorative, and a small bowl for bloodletting. It's ceramic, painted red and blue and shallow enough to catch exactly the amount your body could supposedly spare. Let's pause on that. Bloodletting. The practice of drawing blood to balance the humors was a cornerstone of medieval medicine. According to the theory, your body was a delicate mix of 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. If they were out of whack, you got sick. Solution: let some blood out. Simple. Terrifying. Fringe tidbit. Some barbers used leeches instead of blades. Less dramatic, more squirmy. You shift slightly in your seat, suddenly aware that the jar on the shelf labeled fresh stock is moving. Nope. The barber gives your beard a final comb and steps back. Trim looks sharp, he says. You check a small mirror hanging on the wall. It's wobbly, but your jawline is crisp, your cheeks smooth, and your expression somewhere between pleased and mildly traumatized. Next, he offers to check your scalp. You nod, and he begins a slow inspection with a fine-toothed comb. He's looking for lice, uninvited passengers, that were so common in medieval life they were practically roommates. But here's the thing. People didn't accept lice. They fought them constantly. Combing, oiling, even shaving the head entirely when infestations got bad. And that's what many people did, especially children and lower-class workers. Bald heads were easier to keep clean. They were less itchy, less lice-friendly, and far more practical in warm weather. You pass a boy outside later with a completely shaven head, wearing a cap filled with lavender sprigs. That cap isn't just fashion, it's function. Those herbs help ward off bugs and smell better than whatever his goats rolled in. Historians still argue whether medieval people shaved regularly or just on special occasions. Some records suggest monks and knights had standing rules about grooming. Others show a more flexible approach based on work weather and social occasion. What's clear is that grooming wasn't trivial. It was part of presenting yourself, maintaining health, and keeping your standing in a very visual world. You thank the barber and leave a small coin on the counter. He nods and returns to his next customer, a farmer looking particularly pale and eyeing the bloodletting bowl with open dread. You step outside, grateful for your beard, your scalp, and all your blood staying inside your body. As you walk down the street, you spot an older man brushing his mustache with what looks like a porcupine quill. Probably not regulation. But it works. Grooming tools were often handmade bone combs, bronze razors, even tweezers crafted from twisted wire. Some had cases for their kits tucked into belts or pouches like personal care Swiss Army knives, and they used them a lot. Another curious detail. Some people blackened their teeth with herbs or soot, not from decay, but on purpose, as a fashion statement or to prevent rot. Others powdered their faces with crushed oyster shells to appear paler. Hygiene and beauty were often entwined. You run your hand along your jaw and catch the faint scent of rosemary again. Clean, close-shaven, and with a scalp mercifully free of bugs, for now you continue your walk. And even in the shadow of that barber's leech jar, you realize the medieval world wasn't so far from yours when it came to grooming. Different tools, yes. More blood, absolutely. But the same desire to feel human, polished, cared for. So next time someone says medieval people were all bearded hermits covered in grime, just tell them about the barber surgeons, the rosemary beard oil, and the child with the lavender cap. Because even in a world of open fire pits and mud-stained boots, nothing feels quite as modern or comforting as a really good shave. You're up before sunrise, and today the air feels different. There's something heavy about it, not oppressive, just purposeful. The streets are quiet, the town still tucked in dreams, but you're not staying here. Today, you're marching east, bundled with the hopes of kings, priests, and idealists. You're joining the Crusades. Don't worry, you'll make it back. Probably. Your boots crunch over frosty grass as you fall into line with the rest of the camp followers and knights. Banners flap in the early breeze, armor clinks like wind chimes in a blacksmith's dream, and 100 horses exhale puffs of steam into the chill morning light. Everyone around you is layered in wool and linen faces, smeared with a mix of prayer and sleep. You clutch your pack and step forward, off to the Holy Land. What no one tells you, what truly catches you by surprise, is how clean things are going to get. And not because medieval armies were known for their hygiene. Oh no, the big shift comes later. Once you arrive in the Levant, your whole understanding of cleanliness is turned inside out, scrubbed, perfumed, and laid out on a warm stone floor to dry. Because over there in the cities of the Islamic world, cleanliness isn't just encouraged, it's practically a religion. After weeks of marching dust in your socks, grease in your hair, and dreams of your last proper bath, you arrive at the walls of a city like Damascus or Jerusalem, and suddenly everything smells like sandalwood and rosewater. You're ushered into a hammam, an Islamic public bathhouse, because your local host won't even let you eat in their home unless you're clean. And once you're inside, your jaw nearly drops. The tile work, the flowing water, the heat that wraps around you like a velvet robe. This isn't the rough slapdash rinsing you're used to back home. This is steam soap oil and total transformation. The hammam begins with a warm room where you sit and sweat. Pores open, muscles relax. You can almost hear your medieval grime groaning as it slides off you. Then, attendants scrub your skin with mitts so coarse they may have been repurposed from dragon hide. Dead skin peels away in waves. Next, a rinse with warm water, then a soaping that smells of olive oil and eucalyptus. Your skin sings. It's the cleanest you've ever felt. And here's the thing, this isn't a novelty. This is routine for the locals. In Islamic culture, bathing holds deep spiritual significance. Cleanliness is required before prayer 5 times a day. Ritual, washing, or wudu is part of daily life. Full body purification, ghusl, is performed regularly. Their cities have plumbing, aqueducts, fountains, public restrooms, and even water clocks. It's not just more advanced, it's centuries ahead. You marvel as locals discuss the virtues of different soaps, some scented with ambergris, others with citrus, even floral blends for different seasons. Your favorite so far, lemon and laurel oil. It's sharp cleansing and leaves your skin gleaming. You purchase a bar and immediately wonder if customs will let you bring back a century's worth. A fringe fact floats through your thoughts. The word soap comes from the Arabic saban, and the practice of crafting it from lye and oil was refined in the Islamic world. Soap makers in Aleppo had entire guilds. Their products were traded across continents. Back home, you were using lye that stripped your skin. Here, it's an art form. You lounge in the cool room after your bath, wrapped in linen, sipping mint tea offered by the bath attendant. It's not just about cleanliness. It's about being. You breathe in the calm, the warmth, the scent of citrus wafting on the steam. Historians still debate how much of this bathing culture was adopted by returning crusaders. Some say the influence was enormous traders brought back spices, soaps, even hammam-style architecture. Others argue it was limited to the wealthy, a brief fashion, rather than a full cultural shift. But one thing is certain for those who experienced it firsthand. The memory lingered like sandalwood on skin. You continue your journey moving between camps, fortresses, and trading hubs. And while your fellow crusaders grumble about the heat and long for ale, you're hunting down more of that soap. You even convince a traveling apothecary to sell you a bottle of rosewater for cleansing the eyes and scenting the hair, she tells you. You dab it on your neck. It works just fine there, too. In the camps, things are different. Hygiene takes a hit. Tents are cramped. Water is scarce. And let's just say the latrine situation isn't winning any awards. But still, the memory of that bathhouse clings to you. You seek out fountains. You carry herbs. You soak your feet when no one's looking. You even make a scrub from crushed almonds and sand. It's coarse, but it helps. Your companions laugh at first, trying to seduce the Sultan one jokes. But weeks later, when they see your skin hasn't broken out in boils like theirs, they reconsider. Soon, you're sharing your stash of laurel oil soap in exchange for an extra ration of bread. It's a tiny rebellion choosing cleanliness amid the dust and noise of war. And maybe that's what sticks with you most, the idea that hygiene can be a form of dignity. Not just a luxury, not just about health, but a quiet, persistent way of saying, I matter. Eventually, the campaign winds down. Some men stay behind. Others, like you, prepare to return. You pack your things careful, to tuck away a few bars of soap, a vial of oil, and your memories of warm marble floors and scented steam. When you finally arrive home, friends gather to hear your tales. They ask about battles, relics, miracles. But what you remember most vividly is the soap, the hammam. The moment you sat in that stone chamber, stripped of armor and grime, and felt human again. And slowly, subtly, you change your habits. You wash more often. You rinse your hands before meals. You light herbs to scent the air. Maybe you even build a small bathhouse of your own modest wooden smoky. But it has a basin, a stool, and a bar of olive oil soap. And every time you step inside, you remember. So the next time someone insists medieval knights never bathed, you can smile and say, only until they saw how the other half soaked. Because sometimes the cleanest part of a crusade isn't the victory. It's the bath. You're back home now. The long march is behind you. The war stories have all been told twice, and the only battles you face now are with muddy roads and the occasional overzealous goose. But something's changed. No, not just your improved soap selection. The world has changed. Because now, a shadow is moving through towns and villages, creeping in quietly, then violently fevers, swellings, fear. You hear whispers from travelers and priests. They call it the Great Mortality, the Plague, the Black Death. And suddenly, all the scrubbing and scented herbs in the world feel like they might not be enough. It's the year 1348, and the streets are quieter than usual. Bells toll more often than they should. You walk past a shop with the door shut tight and a crude red cross painted on the wood. A child watches you from behind a shutter, face-pale eyes wide. Even the geese are quiet. But here's the surprising part in the face of this horror. People don't throw hygiene out the window. If anything, they double down. Because the one thing everyone agrees on is that bad smells, miasma, carry disease. So the logic goes, fight the stink, and you might just cheat death. You head into town and notice the difference immediately. People are burning herbs in the streets. Juniper, rosemary, even thyme, not for seasoning, but for sanitizing. Smoke wafts through alleys in perfumed clouds, not entirely unpleasant if you ignore the undertone of desperation. You pass a woman shaking a brass censer as she walks, swinging it like a pendulum of hope. It's filled with amber, lavender, and resin. Behind her, a man follows with a sprig of rue tucked behind each ear. It's said to ward off the plague. Fringe. Yes, but honestly, you're tempted to try it yourself. Then you hear a chorus of hacking coughs from a nearby lane. You tuck your face into your sleeve and walk faster. Inside a small shop, the local apothecary is doing brisk business. He's nearly out of vinegar. Why? Because everyone is using it for hand-washing, floor-scrubbing, face-wiping. Vinegar is the medieval equivalent of hand sanitizer, and people are pouring it over everything short of their livestock. You ask for a bottle, and while you're at it, grab a handful of posies and a small cloth bag of powdered herbs. The apothecary nods approvingly. Boil that with wine, he says. Sniff it when the air turns sour. You don't argue. Now, about the plague doctors. Those bird-masked figures you've probably seen in your nightmares. They weren't everywhere, and not all wore those terrifying beaked masks. But in some cities, yes, physicians stuffed those long, curved noses with sweet-smelling herbs and sponges soaked in vinegar, hoping to filter the diseased air. The masks worked in theory. Mostly, they just looked creepy and made it hard to breathe. You catch sight of one walking down the street, all black robes and unreadable eyes behind glass lenses. Children scatter. Even dogs keep their distance. You can't help but wonder, does he feel safe in that suit, or is he just as terrified as everyone else? The town has started organizing cleanup crews. People, sometimes volunteers, sometimes conscripted, go from house to house burning straw, bedding, scrubbing walls with lime wash, and airing out rooms. You get roped into one of these crews. It's not glamorous, but it's necessary. You enter a house with 2 other volunteers, vinegar-soaked rags tied around your noses. The air inside is heavy. You open shutters, drag mattresses into the street, and scrub every surface with a harsh soap that leaves your hands raw, but oddly comforted. There's a strange kind of peace in the work, a sense that you're doing something. And here's where it gets even stranger. People start bathing more, not less. Despite some fears that water might open the pores to disease, many still believe in the cleansing power of a full-body scrub. You help fill barrels for outdoor baths. The water is boiled with sage and chamomile, and the soap, rough pine-scented, is passed around like treasure. You step into one of the tubs when your shift ends. The water is hot. The steam rises in waves. And for a moment, just a moment, The fear slips away. You're just a person scrubbing your knees, breathing in rosemary, pretending the world isn't falling apart outside. Historians still argue how widespread personal bathing remained during plague outbreaks. Some areas discouraged it. Others insisted on it. But records show one consistent fact: people cared. They tried. They scrubbed, sniffed, boiled, and bathed in the face of something they didn't understand, because what else could they do? You return to your cottage and hang a sachet of herbs over the door, not because you think it's magic, but because it helps. You sleep in a bed sprinkled with lavender. You wash your hands with vinegar and lemon peel. You chew mint when your throat feels sore, and you light a sprig of dried thyme in the fireplace, not for warmth, but for courage. One quirky anecdote floats through your memory. Some towns believed that cheerful scents could keep spirits high enough to repel the plague. People were encouraged to laugh, to sing, to surround themselves with beauty. Hygiene became more than a health routine. It became a small rebellion against despair. You sit by the fire that evening, clean clothes on your back, warm water soaking your feet in a wooden bowl laced with lemon balm. A neighbor stops by to check on you. She carries a bundle of herbs and a bottle of boiled wine. You both sip in silence, nodding, breathing in steam like it's sacred. And in a way, it is. Because even as the plague carves its way through villages and cities, people hold on to their rituals. Their washing, their scented linens, their posy-filled pockets and vinegar-scrubbed floors. Hygiene isn't just survival, it's hope, it's dignity. So, when someone tells you the Black Death turned Europe into a cesspit of fear and filth, you'll remember this: the woman swinging her censer like a holy warrior, the boy scrubbing his hands raw with lemon soap, the volunteers dragging mattresses into sunlight, and you sitting clean by the fire, rosemary clinging to your skin. Because even in the darkest chapters of history, people didn't give up on being clean. They just clung harder to the soap. The fields are golden this morning, rippling like silk under a soft breeze. You're far from the town now, walking along a narrow dirt path, flanked by hedgerows and wildflowers. The air smells like hay, damp earth, and the smoke of someone's breakfast fire, burnt crust and bacon dreams. You're headed to a peasant's cottage, not because anything is wrong, but because, after all this, you're curious about how the regular people lived clean. Not the monks with their organized washing schedules, not the perfumed nobles in their scented gloves, just the villagers, the everyday folk. And to your surprise, what you find is neat. Not lavish, not sterile, but neat. You duck through a low door into a small cottage that smells of wood smoke, wool, and herbs tucked into bundles and hung from ceiling beams. The floor is packed earth, swept smooth. A broom leans near the door. A basin rests near the hearth. A linen cloth hangs drying beside it, still damp from the morning wash. You're met by a young woman, barefoot, hair braided, and tucked into a cloth cap. Her hands are red from scrubbing, and she grins as she waves you inside. She's just finished washing her family's clothes in the nearby stream. You know what that means. It's time to talk about peasant hygiene, which, spoiler alert, might outshine your expectations. You settle near the fire where she's boiling water in a soot-blackened kettle. It's for tea, but also for washing up. Peasant homes didn't have much in the way of plumbing, but that didn't mean they gave up on cleanliness. A small bench beside the hearth holds her cleaning tools: a bucket, a brush, a bar of gritty soap wrapped in cloth, and a wide wooden comb that's clearly been passed through many generations and scalps. She shows you her wash routine, smiling as she explains how her family rinses their hands before meals and how the children wash their faces every morning with rainwater caught in a barrel outside. The rain barrel is covered with a wooden lid to keep out bugs, and when she lifts it, the water inside glistens clear and cold. Here's the thing: peasants lived close to dirt, but they weren't dirty. They didn't have the luxury of scented oils or tiled bathhouses, but they managed. And more importantly, they cared. Clean clothes, washed faces, scrubbed hands. It was a sign of order, of dignity. She laughs as her youngest child toddles in with a clump of mud on his cheek. She reaches for the basin and cleans him off with practiced ease, then hands him a piece of mint to chew. Keeps him from chewing everything else, she jokes. And hey, mint freshens breath. 2 birds, 1 leaf. Fringe detail. Many peasants used ashes to scrub their skin and hair. Wood ash has mild cleansing properties, and when mixed with water, it forms a kind of basic soap. Harsh, yes, but effective. And when paired with wild herbs like thyme or marjoram, it could even smell halfway pleasant. You offer to help with the rest of the washing and end up outside near the stream, where a flat stone serves as a natural washboard. She dunks a woolen smock into the water, scrubs it with a bar of ash soap, and beats it lightly on the rock. It's rhythmic, purposeful, and undeniably tiring. Still, it works. The water runs dark at first, then clear. She wrings out the fabric and drapes it over a nearby bush to dry. Sunlight does the rest. Historians still argue how frequently peasants bathed. The assumption is that with less access to clean water, they didn't bathe much. But archaeological evidence suggests otherwise clean combs, herbal pouches, and even signs of deliberate grooming habits show up in peasant graves. Maybe they didn't have tubs, but they had rivers. And on warm days, a plunge in the stream wasn't just refreshing, it was practical. You pause to dip your own feet into the cold current, letting the chill bite your skin. Around you, birds chirp. A cow bellows in the distance. It's a simple life, yes, but not a careless one. Back at the cottage, the woman prepares lunch, but not before rinsing her hands with warm water. A cloth hangs from a peg on the wall, slightly worn but clean. Her husband returns from the fields, removes his muddy boots, and scrapes them carefully at the door before stepping inside. Little gestures, maybe, but they add up. One of the children brings in a bundle of sweet-smelling herbs from the yard, not for cooking, but for laying under the mattress. Costmary and tansy mostly to deter lice and add fragrance. You help tuck them under the straw bedding. The scent is sharp and medicinal, but oddly comforting. And speaking of lice, let's talk about hair. It's no secret that peasant life included a constant battle with pests, but again, they fought back. Combs soaked in vinegar. Washes made from crushed garlic or nettle. Even head shaving during outbreaks. Some even wore linen caps to bed to keep bugs from settling in their hair. You watch as the woman checks her daughter's hair with a fine comb, parting it section by section like a pro. Any critters found are flicked into the fire. She finishes by braiding it tightly, less for style, more to prevent tangles and make cleaning easier. Functional and pretty. You eat lunch, simple bread and cheese, a bit of onion, and rinse your hands in the basin afterward. The water's changed 3 times today already. It's a small thing, but telling. Another quirky note, peasants often hung their laundry inside during winter near the hearth where smoke from the fire would dry clean the clothes. It might seem odd, but it worked. Smoke helped repel insects and neutralize odors. You imagine a tunic, slowly absorbing the scent of oak and ash, and realize it probably smelled better than some modern gym wear. As the day winds down, you sit on a low stool, while the woman adds more herbs to a pouch she keeps at her waist. For smell, she explains holding it up. And for keeping the flies off, she passes it to you, and you catch the scent lavender sage and maybe just a hint of lemon balm. Homemade aromatherapy. You realize something as the sun dips lower and the cottage glows with orange light. This isn't backward or unwashed. It's resourceful, adapted, clean in ways that don't involve fancy tiles or scented candles, but clean nonetheless. Historians still debate whether peasant hygiene was adequate by modern standards, but maybe that's the wrong question. These people weren't trying to win spa awards. They were surviving, thriving, and finding ways to care for themselves with what they had. You say your goodbyes, thanking the family for their hospitality. They smile, wave, and hand you a small bar of their homemade soap wrapped in cloth tied with twine. You tuck it into your satchel like a precious artifact. Because in a world of the dirt roads, wood smoke, and long days, this is how people stayed clean not with perfection, but with persistence. So next time someone calls medieval peasants filthy, tell them about the ash soap, the braided hair, the herbal sachets, and the pride in a well-scrubbed shirt. Because under that thatched roof, you found a whole lot of dirt and a whole lot of dignity. The sky is paler than usual this morning, tinged with mist, and the faint grayness that hints at something new in the air. You step out of your little cottage and look toward the manor house up the hill. Its stone facade recently patched the banners, less tattered than usual. You can feel the shift coming. The Renaissance is around the corner, and with it a sweeping wave of change across art, science, politics. And ironically, personal hygiene takes a nosedive. Yes, you heard that right. After all the effort, the herbs, the bathhouses, the perfumed sachets, the vinegar scrubs, and your hard-earned herbal shampoo collection things are about to go backward. Welcome to the age of powdered wigs and perfumed gloves. The age where people bathe less, not more. You're standing at the edge of the so-called modern world, and you're about to get a crash course in just how strange cleanliness can become when fashion fear and misunderstood science get tangled together. You make your way into the town square, where a group of finely dressed individuals are gathered around a traveling merchant. He's unloading crates filled with fabric, spices, mirrors, and most interestingly, bottles of cologne. A noblewoman sniffs a lace-trimmed handkerchief delicately before dabbing it under her chin. Italian, she announces, as if that explains everything. You edge closer and catch a whiff. It's heady roses, musk, citrus, and something powdery underneath. Fancy, overwhelming, and meant to cover up the fact that bathing, once so normal in earlier centuries, has now become a rare affair among the elite. Yes, the same people building libraries and painting ceilings in the Sistine Chapel are now avoiding water like it's poison. Why? Well, a few reasons. First, there's the renewed medical belief that water can open the pores and let in bad air. Diseases like the plague and spotted fever are blamed on invisible particles floating around and clean open pores. They're seen as welcome mats for illness. So what do people do instead of bathing? They layer, they perfume, they powder, and then they perfume again. A fringe detail. Some folks actually sealed their skin with wax-based creams to prevent illness from getting in. Imagine slathering yourself in beeswax and flour, then sprinkling on crushed violets to finish. Effective? Not quite. Fashionable? Absolutely. You head into a wealthy household to observe the morning routine of a rising Renaissance gentleman. His valet is already at work brushing down a velvet doublet and preparing a bowl of rosewater for hand washing. There's no tub in sight. Instead, a ritual unfolds involving scented cloths, vinegar rinses, and strategic dabbing. He applies powder under his arms, not talc, but ground iris root mixed with spices. You can almost hear your medieval bathhouse screaming in the distance. His hair is curled, set with pomade, and then dusted with perfumed powder. Lice. Oh, they're still around. The wigs help hide the scratching. And the powder. Well, it smells nice while you're fighting an infestation. Historians still debate how widespread this anti-bathing sentiment really was. Some believe it was mostly confined to the very rich who could afford perfume and silk-lined linens. Others argue that even common folk began to move away from full bathing, replacing it with dry washing, rubbing skin with cloths, herbs, or even raw bread to soak up oils. Yes, bread. You wander into a Renaissance apothecary's shop, where a young assistant is grinding dried citrus peel and orris root into a fine powder. You ask him what it's for. Face powder, he says, to prevent sweating and cover blemishes. You nod. Fair enough. Then he gestures toward a locked cabinet. Toothpaste, he whispers. You peek inside. It's a blend of burnt eggshells, powdered coral, and honey. You blink. Somehow, your cloth and ash scrub routine back in the village feels more advanced. But there's another layer here, a complexity hiding beneath the perfume and powder. Cleanliness has become performative. It's no longer about removing dirt. It's about giving the appearance of purity. You look clean. You smell clean. Whether you are clean, that's secondary. The nobles of this era carry pomanders, small ornate balls filled with spices, herbs, and sometimes cotton soaked in rose oil. They press them to their noses when walking through crowded streets, not just to block out bad smells, but as a talisman against disease. You hold one to your face and inhale cloves, myrrh, and dried orange peel. It's lovely, but also a reminder that nobody here is scrubbing anything below the neck. You find yourself missing the grit of lye soap and the scrape of a twig toothbrush. In contrast, you visit a humble home on the edge of town, more modest, less perfumed, but more practical. The woman here still washes her hands with warm water. Her children rinse their feet before bed. Her linen shifts are scrubbed with soap root and dried in the sun. She doesn't own perfume, but her house smells of fresh rushes, boiled thyme, and clean wood. It's not fancy, but it's honest, and this is where things split. The Renaissance, for all its brilliance, creates a gap. The rich begin to outsource cleanliness to scent, to symbols. The poor hold on to old habits not because of tradition, but because they have to. No one's delivering rose oil by cart to the village, but soap made from ash and fat still gets the job done. There's another irony. While bathing itself declines, public baths, so popular in earlier centuries, are being shut down. They're seen as breeding grounds for immorality and later for disease. What was once a cornerstone of hygiene and social life is now a target of moral panic and medical misunderstanding. Still, not everyone abandons bathing. Some scholars and travelers write about their fondness for hot water. Some doctors begin experimenting with sweat treatments, where people sit in steam-filled tents to purge illness. It's the hammam reborn in pseudo-scientific drag. You return to the manor house at sunset and watch a servant sprinkle rose petals into a silver bowl of water. The lady of the house dips a handkerchief in it and presses it to her face. She hasn't bathed in weeks, but her skin glows. You can't tell if it's from oil or candlelight. Historians still argue about the so-called decline of hygiene in this period. Was it really a collapse or just a change in form? Did people get dirtier or just differently clean? The truth is probably somewhere in between an era, caught between ancient habits and modern myths, perfumed but misinformed. You lie in bed that night wrapped in clean linen head, spinning slightly from all the clove oil. You think about the peasants with their ash soap, the monks with their scheduled baths, the crusaders scrubbing under desert stars. And now you think of a nobleman doused in bergamot and powder, convinced he's protected because his collar smells like citrus. Cleanliness in the Renaissance wasn't gone. It just got distracted. So next time someone waxes poetic about how the Renaissance brought us into the modern age, remind them it also brought us powdered wigs full of lice, face paint made of lead, and the slow disappearance of the good old-fashioned bath. Because sometimes progress means getting a little dirt under your nails. The fire crackles softly beside you and the smell of wood smoke curls into the rafters like an old song. It's late now, maybe the quietest part of the day. Outside, the wind nudges through the trees, and the last amber glow of sunset flickers across the floor. You pull a wool blanket over your shoulders and sit with your feet tucked close the floor warm beneath you. This is it, the end of the road. Not just your journey through the Middle Ages, but through centuries of soap, sweat, scent, and silence. And now, in this quiet moment, it's time to pull it all together. To look back at the dirt and dignity we've unearthed together, and maybe rinse it off one last time. You sit near the hearth and run your fingers along the small objects you've gathered. A sliver of lye soap wrapped in linen, a sachet of dried thyme from a peasant's garden, a brass comb that's seen more scalps than Sunday sermons, a tiny clay pot of powdered mint and ash. None of it gleams, but it all tells a story. Because here's the truth. Medieval people were cleaner than you think, not in spite of their time, but because of it. You think of the bathhouses, steamy and alive with laughter and whispers. You remember the monks dipping their hands in cool stone basins, washing feet and faces with a reverence the world has mostly forgotten. You recall the noblewoman's scented sleeves, the street vendor's pomander, swinging with each step the barber's razor gleaming beside a bowl of blood and rosemary oil. But most of all, you remember the rhythm, the daily acts, the little rituals that said, "I care," a rinse at the well, a scrap of lavender tucked into a collar, a twig comb pulled through tangled hair at dawn. You glance up at the shelf above the hearth where a child's shift hangs, drying. Someone washed it today, scrubbed it, wrung it, hung it up to catch the heat. And there it is, clean, simple, real. Historians still debate whether medieval people smelled worse or better than we think whether their habits count as hygiene by our standards. But you've walked the village paths. You've dipped your hands in their basins. You've seen the vinegar jars, the mint leaves, the streams filled with linen, dancing in the current. The idea that people didn't care just doesn't hold water, no matter how cold or muddy that water might have been. And it wasn't just about dirt. It was about meaning. Cleanliness wasn't always about health. It was about ritual, community, decency, survival. Washing became a way to reclaim control, to draw a line between yourself and the chaos of the world. Even during the plague, when death sat at the doorstep like an uninvited guest, people didn't stop bathing. They washed more. They scrubbed their floors, their hands, their linens. They burned herbs not just to mask the stench, but to protect their families. It wasn't perfect, but it was effort, and effort counts. You close your eyes and let the memories settle. You remember the hammam, where steam and oil smoothed your skin and made you feel like a god. You remember the way the peasant mother rinsed her child's face, how gently she wrung out the cloth. You remember the vinegar rinse you tried under your arms, wincing at first, then realizing, hey, not bad. Fringe tidbit. Some travelers from the Renaissance wrote about how foreigners bathed too much. They saw it as exotic, unnecessary. But behind that criticism was something closer to awe. A quiet respect for people who, even without flush toilets or peppermint mouthwash, found ways to stay clean. So maybe you don't need 7 kinds of lotion or a loofah that vibrates. Maybe cleanliness starts simpler than that. Maybe it starts with a bowl of warm water, a pinch of dried mint, and a moment of stillness. You stretch out your legs, letting the fire warm your feet, and watch the last shadows dance across the walls. It's late now. The world has gone quiet. The streets are empty. The baths have gone cold. But somewhere, a monk is rinsing his hands before prayer. A child is brushing ash from their tunic. A servant is dabbing lavender oil behind her ear, just in case. And you're clean. In the old way, the honest way. Washed in wood smoke and soap that bites a little maybe, but washed all the same. So next time someone says medieval people didn't bathe, you'll smile softly. Because you've been there. You've sat in the tub by the fire, scraped lye soap across your skin, dried your feet with a linen cloth that someone washed with care. You've lived the rhythm, and you know, deep in your bones, that the past smelled a lot sweeter than we remember. Now, as the last embers glow and the silence settles over your room, let yourself drift. Let the weight of your thoughts float like steam from a cooling bath. The world you've walked tonight, muddy roads, rosemary sachets, lavender-scented hands. It's far behind you now. You're warm, clean, still. Breathe in, slow. Hold it. Let it out softer than candle smoke. Imagine your head resting on linen that smells faintly of thyme. Imagine the flicker of firelight dancing across wooden beams. Outside, there's only the hush of wind through trees and the low murmur of a stream not far away. You're safe here. There are no lice, no vinegar scrubs waiting. Just the calm knowledge that long ago people tried. They found ways to feel human in the dirt and the dark. And if they could, so can you. Let the stories of scrubbed stone floors and perfumed pouches melt into dream. Let your body grow heavier with each breath. Let the stillness wrap around you like a woolen cloak pulled straight from the fire's warmth. And tomorrow, you'll wake up with a little more softness, a little more history tucked behind your ear like a clove-scented secret, a little more gratitude for hot water and soap that smells like comfort. But for now, close your eyes. You are home. You are clean. You are resting in a world that remembers. Good night.